you. Okay, there. Okay, now we are good.
Tell me when.
Okay, so this is Herb Finkelstein, and you're gonna share with us some stories or memories of my father, Aaron Hamburger.
I met Aaron in Stuyvesant High School, although I didn't really get to know him then. I got to know Aaron when we both went to Columbia and joined the same fraternity, AE Pi. And when I met Aaron, I realized after a short while there was only one word I could use to describe him, and that he was a mensch. You know what that expression means?
No,
You
not
know,
really.
it means man. But the Yiddish use of the word mensch means a man who is responsible, who's serious, who could be relied upon in every way possible. And I reserve that word for very, very few people, but Aaron Hamburger was a mensch. He undertook a job for the fraternity or otherwise, be sure it would be done promptly, properly, and without any boasting that look how wonderful he was that he did the job. He just did the jobs, whatever they were. He took over every other person's jobs who got too busy. He was just a man. And I loved him. And I loved him more and more as time went on. He even was my law club while, and we became better and better friends as the time went on. Anyway, the other day I asked Margie if it was okay if I talked for 15 minutes. Actually, I wasn't very accurate in that question. Should have asked for 3 questions. I should have said, is it okay if I talk for 2.5 minutes and then I'll tell what's really important about Aaron? Could I talk for 2 hours? Then I'll tell everyone about Aaron. Or talk for about 15 minutes and talk about the Brooklyn Dodgers. What you learn a little while. And I'm going to do a combination of all 3 things. As I told you before, while Aaron had many, many attributes and wonderful things about me, one of the sweetest people I ever met, just a nice, nice man. He was a mensch. He was always the go-to guy. When you need help, ask Aaron Hamburger. It will get done. Anyway, I want to discuss now. Let me see what I wanted to say. I want to discuss now how Aaron and I communicated in recent years and what that led to. After Sally died, I made sure that I spoke to Aaron at least once every week or two, and he was getting weaker and weaker. And one day he casually mentioned something that saddened me and shocked me at the same time. It's a little funny expression to use in a memorial service, but he said something very casually, and I was shocked and saddened. And what he said was that at one time he had been a Brooklyn Dodger baseball fan. And when the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles, he abandoned not only the Dodgers, but all of baseball. In all the years that I knew Aaron, I never had the slightest idea that he was a baseball fan. And why I was saddened when I heard that was because if I had known that Aaron was a Brooklyn Dodger fan, I had many, many stories to share with him. And now it was too late, and that saddened me. And I'm going to do something a little different tonight. I've spoken at a lot of memorials and a lot of funerals. I'm going to do something a little different tonight. I'm going to pretend that Aaron is still with us. And I'm going to tell him a couple of stories that I would have told him a long time ago, had I known he was a fan, even for a short time. By the way, in Margie's letter to me about this program that we're running, she mentioned that Aaron told many, many stories to his family that were recorded. I think that's fabulous. I think more and more parents should do that. It's a wonderful device for bonding, filling in a lot of blanks for your kids, encouraging them to ask questions, which they are very often are reluctant to ask because they don't know if they're stepping on somebody's toes. So I think that it was a wonderful thing that he told stories. I doubt, but I may be wrong, that he told any stories about the Brooklyn Dodgers because I never had the slightest hint that he was a baseball fan. When the Dodgers left Brooklyn in 1957, fans reacted in several different ways. Aaron and I had a fraternity brother named Herman O'Keefe. Did you ever hear that name, Margie? Herman O'Keefe was a brilliant Columbia student who, when the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles, became a Los Angeles Dodger fan. Very few people did that. Most people acted like I did. They took a leave of absence from baseball and prayed that something would come to replace the Dodgers, and something did eventually come called the New York Mets. And then there were people like Aaron who apparently dropped out as a baseball fan completely. He was probably so upset and so hurt that he just couldn't watch baseball anymore. Anyway, as I said earlier, I have many, many Brooklyn Dodgers stories. Two of them are very important to me because I'm part of the story. I'm part of the story. I'm going to tell these two stories as if Aaron were here to hear them, because it would make me so happy to know that he would have heard these stories. And maybe in the long run, it might stimulate people like Margie and the rest of the family to look into how the Brooklyn Dodgers affected Aaron's growing up. Because from my point of view and my family and my friends, the Brooklyn Dodgers were the reason that living in Brooklyn was worthwhile. Everybody I knew loved them. Everybody lived and died with them. And it was just part of the scenery. And that's the way it was. So I'm going to tell two stories now and pretend Aaron is sitting there with a big smile on his face, as he always had. And I'm sure that when I told him these stories, he would have come up with stories to tell me. And that's what I would really have hoped for. The first story is about Jackie Robinson. I think you probably both know who Jackie Robinson is and why he was famous and why he was important. Let me give you a little background. If you don't understand anything I say because you're not baseball fans, raise your hand. Ask me questions. I don't mind being interrupted. Anyway, here's the background. In 1946, at the last day of this season, the Brooklyn Dodgers were one game out of first place. If they won that game, there would be a tie for first place and there'd be a playoff. It looked like the Dodgers had won that game, but the winning run in the last of the ninth was thrown out at home, and the Dodgers didn't win the pennant. But every Dodger fan was confident about the following year because the Dodgers had a good team, were keeping all their players, and were going to bring Jackie Robinson up from Montreal, that minor league team, to join the Brooklyn Dodgers. We were positive that Robinson would be a Dodger in the following year. After all, he was the first Black player to integrate baseball, and he turned out to be the most valuable player in the minor leagues. Anyway, 1947 came around, spring training started, and there was no announcement that Robinson was coming to the Dodgers. Day by day, the fans were becoming more and more panicky and worried. Why isn't Robinson coming to the Dodgers? Did he get hurt? Did Branch Rickey change his mind and decided not to bring in a Black player? Did the league tell him he couldn't bring in a Black player? What was going on? We had no idea. All we knew was we were terribly, terribly upset. The last exhibition game of that season was the Dodgers playing Montreal, their farm team, at Ebbets Field. And I decided to go to that game because I thought it might be the only time I was going to have the opportunity to see Robinson play in case he wasn't brought up to the major leagues. So I headed out to Ebbets Field to sneak in. At that time, I had become a sneaker into baseball games for the last 2 years. People were shocked. I didn't look like a guy who would sneak into a baseball game. And people asked me, my friends said, how did I do it? And I said, it was very simple. When they opened the gates early in the game to let people leave who wanted to leave early, The tough boys in the neighborhood would run into Ebbets Field and the guards would chase them. While the guards were chasing them, the overweight Jewish boys would stroll in. And that's how I used to sneak into Ebbets Field. Why I decided to sneak into that exhibition game, I don't remember. But there was Jackie Robinson and Roy Campanella, another black player on Montreal. On my way to Ebbets Field to sneak in, and Ebbets Field was 2 blocks away from my apartment house, I met a boy named Bobby Rubin, who was 1 year older than me, and in my school. We weren't friends. He was a year ahead, but he was on his way to sneak in too. And he laughed when I told him we should sneak into left field. He said, "Why? It's an exhibition game. Nobody's going to care. Let's sneak into the main entrance, which is called the rotunda, and sit in one of the really good seats." Well, I was scared to death, but I didn't want to act like a wimp. So we went in and looked for seats right behind home plate. And the only empty seats we saw when we first came in was Branch Ricky's box. It had 6 or 8 seats in it. And there was only one man sitting in that box, a man named Harold Parrott, who was the traveling secretary of the Dodgers, of the Dodgers. Anyway, sometime during the course of that game, I don't remember exactly when, a young man came over to Harold Parrott, and the two of them started talking in whispers. And we couldn't hear what the young man was saying, but what Harold Parrott said came across very clearly. And this is what Harold Parrott said to that young man: "Tell Jackie when he finishes his shower to come to the office and we'll make the announcement. We'll make the announcement. My God, we'll make the announcement." Bobby Rubin and I got up immediately. We ran home to turn on our radios because if there was an announcement being made, that's where we would hear about it. On the station WFAN or whatever, MW, I can't remember, WHN. That's where they broadcast the Dodger games. And we heard the announcement. And even though there are some blank spots in my memory of exactly Jackie Robinson's travels to the major leagues, I am 100% sure that Bobby Rubin and I were the first 2 people in America, other than baseball people, who knew Jackie Robinson was coming to the major leagues and would change the Dodgers and change Brooklyn and change the whole country. And I'm very proud of that story and my little tiny place in it.
Wow, that's an amazing story.
The second story I want to tell you is about my favorite player of all time, a man named Gil Hodges. Gil Hodges was a teammate of Jackie Robinson. He was more famous as the manager of the New York Mets, who won a World Series when they were terrific underdogs. But he was my favorite player, and you're going to hear the story of how that came about and what Gil Hodges accomplished. People today might call this story magical realism. That's a type of fiction that's a blurry combination of realism and fantasy. And even though this sounds like magical realism, this story is 100% factual because I was the guy in every part of this story. And so I know it's true. I didn't make it up. When the story starts in early 1946 or 47, Gil Hodges was now on the New York, a teammate of Robinson and others on the Brooklyn Dodgers. He became, when it was considered that Robinson could safely become a second baseman, which was his natural position, he had been put at first base at the beginning to protect him from other people spiking him and hurting him. Hodges was assigned to be first baseman for the Dodgers, and he turned out to be the outstanding first baseman for the decade of the 1950s. The big problem with Hodges, even though he was considered one of the strongest men to ever play baseball, is he couldn't seem to hit. He couldn't get hits. It was unbelievable, but he couldn't. Eventually, he became an excellent, productive professional hitter. He had 100 RBIs in 7 straight years. He was a machine hitting sacrifice flies. He led the league in Grand Slam home runs. He hit 4 home runs and one. He became a very, very fine hitter. But when this story started, he wasn't. He was a terrible hitter. Anyway, my best friend at the time, named Ron Cowan, who eventually became a friend of Aaron's too, and I went to a weekend game at Ebbets Field. And when Gil Hodges came up to bat for the first time, Ron Cowan turned to me and said something very important. He said, that Gil Hodges, he has such power, but he never uses it. That Gil Hodges has such power, but he never uses it. Hodges thereupon swung and hit a mighty home run over the left field fence. And Ron Cowan and I both leaped to our feet to cheer, and we cheered the way teenage boys cheered. In those days, we punched each other in the shoulder. That's how boys celebrated in the 1940s. Anyway, if I were a gambling man, I would bet that Ron Cowan never thought about that day again. He just forgot it. And I never spoke to him about it. And when I finally got ready to try to reach him and call him toward the end of his days, he died before I had an opportunity to reach him. So Ron Cowan was out of the picture. And I might have forgotten that incident too, but just a week or so later, I was listening to a night game in the dark of my bedroom on Washington Avenue in Brooklyn, and Gil Hodges comes up to bat at a very crucial time. And I suddenly thought, if it worked once, maybe it'll work twice. So I stared off into the dark of my bedroom and I whispered, that Gil Hodges has such power, but he never uses it. Now, I would be lying to you if I told you Hodges hit another home run. He didn't hit a home run, but he hit a single, a very, very important single. And then I knew I was onto something big. Something really magical was about to happen. Now, when it came to baseball, I was very superstitious. I was superstitious because my father taught me to be superstitious. When it came to baseball, he was a very superstitious man. Or it might have come to me through DNA, his DNA, and that's how I became superstitious, but I was. And I realized when Hodges got a hit that night, I better create some ground rules to deal with this magical power, which I now knew I clearly had. And that night I created 5 ground rules to deal with this business that I had. And here were the 5 rules. Number one, only use the magic words in a crucial situation. Number 2, when invoking the magic words, only say them once. Number 3, don't tell anybody about the magic words. Number 4, don't get discouraged if they don't work every time. And number 5, don't keep statistics. Well, I broke one of the ground rules almost immediately because on a weekend I was listening to a Dodger game on the radio with my father. And believe it or not, Hodges comes up to bat in one of those situations where the magic words are called for. So I turned my back on my father and I moved my lips and said, that Gil Hodges has such power, but he never used it. My father was a sharp man. He spotted me apparently talking to myself. He said, Herb, I didn't hear. What did you say? I couldn't hear. What did you say, Herb? So I had a dilemma. Do I tell my father the truth and hope he doesn't spill the beans? Or do I make up some kind of cock and bull story while I was talking to myself? I decided to tell my father the truth, and I swore him to secrecy. He laughed when I told him about Gil Hodges and the power. But what happened was this. Every time Hodges would come to bat when my father and I were together listening to a game or watching a game, my father would say, Herb, give him the power. Give him the power. Laugh. But I gave Hodges the power from that night in my bedroom till the end of 1957 when the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles and my heart was broken in ways I couldn't possibly describe. And as I said before, I took a leave of absence from baseball. I just didn't follow baseball anymore. But then in 1962, the New York Mets were born. And who was on the original Mets team? But Gil Hodges. Mm-hmm. Is to anybody who was following baseball at all, that Hodges was on the Mets only to provide a nostalgic link to the past, tying the Met fans into the Dodger fans. His knees were shot. He was way over the hill, but who cared? I had the Mets. I had Gil Hodges. All was right with the world.
Mm.
In the first month or so of the 1962 season, the Mets lost just about every game they played. But they were about to play a Sunday doubleheader against the Milwaukee Braves at Polo Grounds, where the Mets played their first few years. I asked Iris if she wanted to go to the doubleheader with me. She said, no, it's too cold. And besides, would need a babysitter for too long. For the kids, a doubleheader is a long thing. I went by myself. And that day was the highlight of my relationship with Gil Hodges. The first game was a very good game. Going into the ninth inning, the Mets were behind 2-1. But all of a sudden, I realized that Gil Hodges would be coming up to bat in the last of the ninth. Could I still use the magic words? I had 5 years. I didn't know whether they had expired or not. And Hodges was a Met now, not a Dodger. Did that matter? Now, what the hell does it matter? Well, it's a difference. I have nothing to lose. I looked down my aisle, and there was a young mother with a son of about 6 years old. They were both freezing and turning blue. And as I stared off at them, I said, that Gil Hodges has such power, but he never uses it. And believe it or not, Gil Hodges got a single, an infield single, a little dribbler that he beat out to first base. And the next batter up was the catcher named Hobie Landreth, who was a very poor player. He was on his way out of baseball. He hit one home run in his whole career with the Mets. He came up and Hobie Landreth hit a 2-run home run, and the Mets won that first game, 3-2. In games, I decided this would be a perfect time to stop playing my magic game with Gil Hodges. He got a hit. The Mets won a very rare and very sweet game. This is a good time to stop. And I made that vow. I was stopping. That's because I couldn't anticipate what was going to happen in the second game. The second game was another terrific game, but very different from the first game. The score kept changing. The lead kept changing back and forth and back and forth. And going into the ninth inning, it was tied. The game was tied 7-6. Gil Hodges hadn't started the second game. He only came in as a substitute around the fifth inning, and he was still up. He was still in the lineup in the ninth inning. Well, I know I had vowed never to use the magic words again, but I broke the vow. Then I looked at that woman, her son, and she was still sitting there freezing under a blanket. And I barely croaked out that Gil Hodges has such power, but he never uses it. And Hodges swings and hit a fly ball down the right field line. In any other ballpark in the civilized world, that would be an easy out. But this wasn't any other ballpark. This was the goddamn Polo Grounds with the craziest dimensions in the world. And the ball kept floating and floating and floating till it landed in the grandstand for a one-run victory for the Mets. And I leaped to my feet to cheer for that home run, but I couldn't cheer because I was crying too hard. I was just crying my eyes out. And they weren't tears of joy. They certainly weren't tears of despair. I believe they were tears of recognition. They were recognition that at the age of 30, with a wife and 2 daughters at home on the Upper West Side, with a busy law practice on Park Avenue, I had finally brought my Brooklyn boyhood to closure. Well, Ebbets Field, where it all started, is gone. The Polo Grounds, where it all came to that glorious end, is gone. Ron Cowan is gone. Gil Hodges is gone. And I alone am left to tell the tale. Those are the 2 stories I would love Aaron to have heard. I hope somehow through you and your family, he'll hear them and it'll inspire you to find out if the Brooklyn Dodgers had any effect on your dad at all. I think they might have, they probably did, because it was such an important part of living in Brooklyn. We lived and died with the Dodgers. I had philosophical discussions about the Dodgers with my friend. Why was rooting for the Dodgers different than rooting for any other team? It just was. It was different. We were more involved. Every World War II movie had a soldier from Brooklyn who was asked in the middle of the battles, would ask, "What did the Dodgers do yesterday?" Anyway, I hope I did, in this unusual way, I hope I did honor to your dad and your granddad. He was just a Superman. And I hope maybe this will open up some other avenues. Now that you're thrilled with his stories, you could find some more things about him. If there are relatives or friends who knew him while the Dodgers were still here. And I thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Herb. That is a gift. You've just given us such a gift.
Well, I'm the recipient of the gift. And you and I are about to have a good cry, so we could stop right now before that happens. But Aaron and Sally were just two special people. There weren't any like them, and we miss them. And I'm glad I had this opportunity. And I was so busy talking that I forgot to do something. I started the story with my Stuyvesant hat on.
I see that.
Then I was going to put on my Columbia hat. The hat, and I forgot to do it. I became so enthralled with my own story that I, but I hope you and I stay in some contact. I hope the gathering is a great success. It should be, because people should have wonderful things to say.
Yes, yes, and we will miss you, but you know how to reach me now.
I know how to do now. I don't
And
know anything about me as Case since we spoke the last time. You remember I asked, well, if you knew anything about how, because I feel a little responsible. I helped your dad find a lawyer, that's the case. So I'm just curious how things are going with that.
yeah,
So
I think Karen actually told me that they haven't made much progress, and it's something about, she has a statement, she's talking about her daughter, she has to reach maximum medical improvement before we get to, I don't know, moving forward with any kind of legal stuff.
because they want to make sure in cases like that, they want to make sure that they know all the damages that she suffered in some couple of years. So that's
Yeah.
that's probably what they're waiting for. That's the
Okay.
max. Listen, let me know how when you do October 26th is the day for you.
October 21st, but I will get back to you and let you know how it went.
I hope it's a great success. Lovely meeting your daughter, Anouk.
Yeah.
Is that named after Anouk or me?
It's not directly named after that, but she is named because in honor of French. My husband grew up in Switzerland for the most part, in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, so he's very fond of the language and the culture, and so that's.
I don't know if you know that actress, that French actress. Her name was
do.
Anouk. She was in 8½. That was one of her most famous roles. That movie by Fellini. Did you ever see?
Yeah.
So I was just curious if that was the origin of that name. Okay, listen, nice meeting you. Good luck with your dancing career. And talk again. We'll talk again, Margie.
Okay, thank you so much, Herb.
For sharing.
One question. How can I get to see